Hi, this is my Graham Storytime reading A Diamond in the Window. This is chapter 4. Now, I have to warn you, this next picture at the beginning of this chapter haunted me for years. I remember this picture. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Grandma today, and while I'm making this, Grandma's 95 years old. And I reminded her of the book, and she said, "Oh yeah, I remember that book." So, let me show you this picture. Pretty creepy, huh? This is that bedroom upstairs that they discovered. So, let me tell you about this picture. This is chapter 4. All right. The sunshine next morning was so bright and honest and normal that Edward and Eleanor felt very brave about getting back to the hidden chamber. They climbed up the ladder steps courageously and poked their red heads over the edge of the trap door. The little room was altogether different. Sunlight was pouring in through the keyhole window. Instead of being frightening, the furnishings and the small beds looked inviting, friendly, welcoming. They climbed the rest of the way and stood up in the room. They walked around, they bounced on the beds and examined the toys. Then the keyhole window itself drew them closer. It was very large, filling the space between the floor and the ceiling. The square bottom section could be raised and lowered like an ordinary sash. It was made of clear glass. The huge round upper part was put together with many pieces of stained glass, colored and modeled in the fashion of bygone day. In the middle, fitting a little unevenly, there was a great lump of clear glass shaped like a gigantic gem. Its rounded surface cut into many facets. It was so thick that it thrust out from the flat plane of the window, projecting into the room a full inch. "Look at that diamond," said Edward. "It's not a diamond, silly," said Eleanor. "It's just glass. A diamond that size would be worth $1,000,000, maybe more." "Well, it looks like a diamond to me," said Edward. Eleanor had to admit that it was a very brilliant piece of glass cutting. Each of its faces seemed to reflect one of the colors of the many-colored window, and to gather them and blend them and pour them back again in one great ray of clear white light. From that moment on, whenever they returned, they called it the diamond. Edward forgot instantly that it was only glass, and Eleanor had to keep reminding herself that she knew, of course, it was not a diamond. Why, if it were real, they could sell it for at least $900,000, which would be enough to pay back taxes and paint the house, and Aunt Lily could stop giving piano lessons, but of course it was only glass. Edward was fascinated next by the block castle. It was made of old-fashioned anchor blocks. The little cubes and arches and columns and roofing pieces looked just like cut stone and brick and slate, but they were really made of molds from white and red and blue cement. The set of blocks had been used to build the castle must have been the very biggest and most expensive kind, for the castle was enormous. Its walls and turrets and courtyards and towers covered the surface of the table. "Edward, here's the box came in." He pulled it out. Inside it were booklets with pictures that showed how to build old-fashioned railroad stations and lighthouses and monastery portals and belvederes and mausoleums. Eddie's fingers itched to tear down the castle and build a lighthouse. "Oh, see what it says on the cover," says Eleanor, and she found the lid to the box. Pasted on it was a small white card, and written on the card in a delicate hand were the words, "For Ned and Nora, from their devoted friend, Krishna." "Oh, where are they all?" said Eleanor. Somehow, Ned and Nora must be brought back to this house again, to sleep in their beds and play with their blocks once more. Prince Krishna must come back and to marry Aunt Lily and to make up games for Ned and Nora again, and then she and Eddie would join in the games, and perhaps they too would find diamonds and rubies in their pockets. It was from this room that the lost children had disappeared. The trail must begin here. Eddie was opening the drawers of the enormous dresser with its tall mirror. Eleanor helped him. They were all empty. They had looked at the wooden cart resting as shafts in the corner. It was a dog cart, only big enough for dolls, but there were no dolls, unless you counted the armless, legless one in the toy box in the corner. "A basket case," jeered Edward when Eleanor picked it up and looked at it. "Poor thing," Eleanor cooing at it. Next to the doll's box was a bookcase. Leaning against it were 2 homemade fishing rods. On top of it was a white clay bubble pipe, and next to the bubble pipe was a large seashell. Inside the bookcase there was nothing but books, except for a long, narrow box on the bottom shelf. "What's that?" said Edward. He took it out and looked at it. There were 2 round holes in the top, and several strings ran across it from end to end, but the strings hung limp. Puzzled, Eddie put it back. Eleanor was looking at the books. They were the same old familiar Concord authors, Thoreau, Emerson, Louisa May Alcott. Eleanor was glad to see Louisa's books there, because they were banished from the library downstairs. Uncle Freddie couldn't stand them. He called Louisa a sentimental old girl, and he was always threatening to smash her plaster bust. Louisa's poor, chipped, yellowed head was not even allowed in the same room at Henry's and Waldo's, but had to stand forlornly in the hall, with no one to talk to at all, except a sympathetic Eleanor. Eleanor loved her, and she loved her books, and she was terribly proud of living so near to Orchard House, where Louisa had lived when she wrote Little Women. Nora must have loved her, too. It was then that Edward discovered something interesting about the window. There were scratches on the clear glass pane. He looked closer. They were words, English words, inscribed on the glass in patterned groups like verses of a poem. The writing was spidery and fine, and he showed it to Eleanor, but she couldn't focus on it with her astigmatic eyes. "You read it," she said. Edward spelled it out. He had trouble with the first word of the title, which was transcendental, but no trouble at all with the second. It was treasure. Laboriously he worked his way through the poem. He was used to reading only print, and his own fat, round script, and then going was hard. Eleanor mumbled the words after him and found herself becoming more and more excited. Here is what Edward read. "Transcendental treasure. This is the keyhole's key to treasure transcendental. Object symbols are of abstracts monumental. The oversoul sublime to ever-changing forms repeats one truth divine to man and nature's terms." Edward boggled at the strange words. "What is all that about?" he said. But the rest of the verses were easier. "The first one is a harp that plays angelic chords. Its music sings a tune too deep and high for words. The second is a doll child possessed by one of 4, fit for any princess to mother and adore. Living in his Eden, playing on his flute, Henry hoed his beans and wore an old suit. Find the third in Walden, find it if you will. Pearls from Coromandel, diamonds from Brazil. A mirror shall reflect what your tomorrows hold. A treasure it will give from its infinitude. Twinkle little stars like diamonds in the sky. You can bring them down if you learn to fly. The sixth one is a ruby, flawless shall it glow. Love itself the giver for a bride of snow. The seventh is a treasure rounded by the sea. Deep and dark it lies, you can set it free. A treasure made of ivory, a palace for the soul. Melodious marble halls, a treasure map unfold. The last one is a treasure too precious to be bought, as perfect and as fair as the crystal sphere of thought. Eye of bird, eye of fowl, hides the treasure chest, transcendental jewels. What of them is the best? Finished Edward. Which of them is the best? Finished Edward. He leaned back and rubbed his eyes, while Eleanor said some of the words over to herself. A doll fit for a princess? Pearls, diamonds, rubies, treasure chests, jewels? She clapped her hands. Jewels, jewels, it's a treasure hunt for jewels. Eddie picked up the lid of the block box and held it up to the window. He was comparing the message written on the card by Prince Krishna with the verses scratched into the glass. The F's are the same, he said. See, the bottom loop is backwards, and they both have the same fancy R's. You're right, Prince Krishna must have written the poem, so it's Prince Krishna's treasure hunt. Eleanor paced up and down with her hand behind her back, a gesture borrowed from Uncle Freddie. He made it up, the treasure hunt for Ned and Nora, she said. Only instead of hiding candy and toys, he hid real treasures, rubies and pearls and diamonds, the way Aunt Lily said. Do you know how rich the Maharajas are? They live in palaces of solid gold. Eleanor whirled around at Edward and stamped her foot. Let's find them. If we find just one or two of the treasures, we'll be rich too. Eddie jumped up and down and shouted, Jewels, jewels! It must have been the vibrations of the stamping and the jumping that did it. There was a sudden whirling noise, and something flew at Eddie, knocking him perilously next. Near the open trap door, Eleanor shrieked and saved him from falling through it by grabbing him wildly, dropping on one elbow and scraping off the skin. In one corner of the room, where it had been thrown in deep shadow, there was something they had not seen before. It was an enormous jack-in-the-box. It had suddenly burst open and thrown itself at Edward with a horrid lunging spring. Up and down now it recoiled upon itself, lashing violently back and forth, throbbing its great nose upon the floor. At last it stopped, and Edward went over to it cautiously and lifted up its ugly head. Oh, boy. Oh, said Eleanor, covering her face with her fingers and looking through them. Isn't it horrible? The jack-in-the-box had a terrible face. There was a great hooked nose with almost met an upward-looking chin. The eyes were surrounded with black shadows, and the wide mouth was extended in a frightful grin, with jagged teeth under a black mustache. It leered at them. There still seemed to be a ghost of tense, vibrating life in its spring, and it escaped Edward's fingers and flopped forward again at him, hitting him hard. The head was as heavy as lead. Something about it disturbed Eleanor. She pointed at the cloth wound around the head. Isn't that some sort of turban? She said. Yes, said Edward, like the ones they wear in India. He pushed the jack head back upon itself and jammed it into the box and shut the lid. It seemed to want to burst out again, and he had to kneel on the lid and hold it down with both hands. Hook it, will you? Said Edward. Eleanor hooked it clumsily, and then they climbed slowly down the ladder steps. She knew now why she was so disturbed. There was a funny kind of resemblance between the jack and the picture of Prince Krishna. Yet the jack looked all bad, and Prince Krishna all good. All good. He was, wasn't he? And that's the end of that chapter. You want to go back and look at that picture again? Yeah, the pictures always kind of tell you what's coming up. And here is that picture. Pretty scary stuff, huh? All right. Think about that for a while.